The company's annual party was meant to be lighthearted, a night of drinks and casual jokes. I didn't intend to offend anyone or start a fight. I thought I was just being funny. I leaned over the dinner table, grinning, and said, "I probably have more experience than all of you combined." Meant to get a laugh. Meant to break the ice. Half-hearted chuckles spread around the table. Everyone sounded unsure except him. Callum didn't smile. He didn't even twitch. He simply stood quietly and walked out. No words. No explanation. Just silence. The next morning, a folded note sat on the counter, and in the mailbox an envelope from his lawyer waited, stark and impersonal. I kept telling myself it was harmless. Drinks were flowing, people were laughing, the mood was easy. I repeated the joke, louder this time, thinking maybe it hadn't landed. "Honestly, I probably know more than everyone here," I laughed. People laughed back, but it was that forced, uncomfortable kind that vanishes as quickly as it appears. Callum didn't even fake a grin. He simply put down his fork and looked at me like I had just said something incomprehensible. I tried to lighten it, teasing him, calling men too sensitive these days. Still nothing. When the check came, he paid, stood, and left. I rolled my eyes and muttered that he couldn't handle a confident woman. That evening he didn't call or yell. He packed a small bag and said he would stay at his mother's for a few days. I scoffed at the dramatics. He looked at me calmly and said, "You think it's funny because it's never you being laughed at." Then he was gone. The next morning his coffee mug vanished. His wedding ring sat on the counter. I laughed, shaking my head, but the house already felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty, too careful. I kept telling myself he'd come back once he cooled down. At work, I retold the story as if it were a comedy bit. Some coworkers laughed politely. One said their husband would have left too. I dismissed them. Men just couldn't take honesty anymore, I thought. But something inside me was already twisting. When I called that night, he didn't pick up. Instead, I got a text from his mother, Ellen. "Stop calling until he's ready." My blood boiled. I called my own mom, Ruth, who told me to stand my ground. "He'll come back when he realizes he's being ridiculous," she said. A few days later, I went to pick up some papers from the house. Callum's study door was slightly open. On the desk lay a neat stack of documents and printouts, all from Grant and Foster LLP. My stomach dropped. I told myself it wasn't what it looked like, but I still snapped a photo. I texted him later. We needed to talk. His reply came hours later. "There's nothing left to discuss." I stared at the screen until it dimmed, realizing perhaps he truly meant it when he walked out. A week later, a mutual friend had a birthday dinner. I went, confident he wouldn't create a scene. But when he arrived, calm and polished, I felt a surge of pride. I wanted him to see what he'd left behind. The conversation turned light, so I repeated my joke. "I probably have more experience than everyone here combined." Silence. Someone coughed. Callum just stared, expressionless, then quietly said, "That explains a lot." My laugh faltered. Nobody else laughed. I accused him of trying to humiliate me. He replied evenly, "You do that well enough on your own." He reached into his jacket, placed an envelope beside my plate, and said, "You love being the center of attention. Here's something worth discussing." Then he left. Inside were draft divorce papers, dated 2 weeks before the dinner, before my joke even landed. He'd already planned it. Everyone at the table avoided my eyes. I smiled tightly, trying to convince myself he'd calm down, but later, driving home, my laughter sounded foreign and hollow. I couldn't stop thinking about those papers. He hadn't just reacted. He'd been preparing for months, quietly building a case. I returned to the house to pack. His study was locked, but I knew where the spare key was hidden. Inside, everything was immaculate. Files neatly labeled. Finances, emails, custody, correspondence. My hands shook as I opened one folder, screenshots of old posts, texts, even comments from friends about my past. Another folder held receipts and bank records showing misuse of shared funds. Each page felt like a silent indictment. When he came home later, I confronted him. He looked at me calmly and said, "Lock up when you're done." 2 weeks later, we sat across from each other at mediation. I wore a simple navy dress, trying to seem composed. He was calm, distant, almost untouchable. I explained the situation as a misunderstanding, as a joke taken too far. His lawyer opened a folder, screenshots, messages, bank statements. I tried to explain them away. "They show a pattern of public disrespect," the lawyer said. Callum didn't speak once. When asked if he had anything to add, he said simply, "I'm here for closure." I tried to gain back control. I swore I never cheated. The mediator read the summary. Property and custody awarded to him. Immediate separation. I looked at him, hoping for mercy. He nodded slightly and said quietly, "You wanted everyone to laugh. Now they have their ending." Then he walked away. The house was empty when I returned. His belongings gone. Closets half open, drawers bare. Even the faint scent of his cedar soap was fading. On the kitchen table, a thick envelope bore my name. Inside, final divorce papers, signed, dated. No note. No explanation. Just the cold finality of ink on paper. I called my mother. She sighed. "Maybe you went too far this time," she said. I told her it was just honesty, humor meant to entertain. She shook her head softly. It wasn't humor. It was cruelty disguised as confidence. 4 days I wandered the empty house, touching the things he'd left behind. A chipped mug, a lone sock, our son's old drawing on the fridge. Silence pressed down harder than any argument ever had. "It was just a joke," I whispered to the empty rooms. I said it again and again, hoping that somehow made it true. But the house stayed silent. That night, I sat in his chair, staring at the empty space where his computer had been. I thought about how calm he'd been, how quietly he'd let me dismantle everything myself. I laughed once, but it was shaky, fractured. I wanted to believe he'd miss me someday. Deep down, I already knew. He'd stopped listening long before he ever walked out the door.